Episode 16 of the Faithful Fanatic podcast. We are joined by a very special guest, former 49er wide receiver, Super Bowl champion, ABC7 news anchor, sports anchor, Mike, and a great mentor of mine. Mike, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate it. I've been liking what you both have been doing. So it's a lot of fun to talk 49ers. And boy, a lot to talk about after that Seattle game.
There's a lot to talk about. And usually with our show following the game, we spend a lot of time recapping the game, but it's inevitable. There's just so many other things to talk about. All the 49ers injuries, the state of the team moving forward, which direction should they go in for the remaining 8 games this year. Let's start off by talking about what happened yesterday against the Seahawks. Mike, I'm particularly interested in your thoughts regarding Jimmy Garoppolo and Kyle Shanahan. Let's start off by talking about Kyle Shanahan.
Well, I've gone back and forth with Kyle. He's blown 2 double-digit leads in the fourth quarter in 2 different Super Bowls as a coordinator and as a head coach. And I go back to this because he's got a lot of confidence in what he does, and he creates schemes to make his skill players be successful. But sometimes he has poor choices of implementing those in the game. And that first series with that Wildcat with McKinnon and IU, I was like, what? That was the worst play he's called since he's been the head coach of the 49ers. Second one was that rollout, Jimmy throwing it back across the field behind the line of scrimmage to Trent Taylor. I was like, what is he thinking? So I just sometimes I think Kyle thinks he's the quarterback. And as a result, he doesn't have enough confidence in the guy who's on the field, and that would be Garoppolo. And it was kind of evident, even though the game was settled by the time Mullins got in there, but he lets Mullins throw the ball down the field. He doesn't let Jimmy throw the ball down the field. Drives me crazy. You know, Bill created an offense. You know, the Tampa 2 defense is what's tried to stop the West Coast offense. Kyle's is a similar guy, and he's very confident in what he calls. So much so, he doesn't give Jimmy options to audible out. He thinks whatever he's called against whatever defense is going to work. That's bordering on arrogance, all right? And, you know, a lot of it works, a lot of it doesn't for him. But it just drives me crazy because the Niners are not a come-from-behind team.
Nope.
Number one, 8 times, I think, this year, and they haven't won 1. Number 2, worst pass defense in the NFL, the Seattle Seahawks, and he's running the ball. You know, you could see it when Mullen came in. Let Jimmy throw the ball down the field. It just was driving me nuts. But that borders on arrogance that he says, well, even though they're, you know, a pretty good run defense, I'm going to run against them. You know, so that just kind of drives me crazy. So I don't know what you guys think about him, but I think this is one of his worst game plans he's had. Didn't have the team really prepared, it didn't seem like. And, you know, everybody questions Jimmy. They question this, they question that. I'm questioning Kyle Shanahan. And I don't care what anybody says or thinks. You know, this guy, he can't get it over the top, and it just drives me crazy. I don't know what you guys think.
So the reason why we're chuckling over here a little bit is someone just dropped a comment saying that Marco looks like Jed York. So that's kind of the reason why we started laughing there a little bit.
A little bit.
There's a little bit.
Didn't leave at halftime.
Like,
yeah, I would have been gone real quick.
So to recap kind of everything you just said, I'm in 100% agreement. The 3rd and 5 Wildcat call to Jerick McKinnon was just mind-boggling because there was reports going throughout the week that Jerick McKinnon was battling tired legs. His legs were tired. So you're going to give it to the least explosive running back on the team on 3rd and 5. Take the ball out of your quarterback's hands. Garoppolo wasn't playing that poorly before that decision to run the ball with Jerick McKinnon with Brandon Ayuk lined up alongside of him in the Wildcat. The play previous to that, or 2 plays before that, he missed Kittle, overthrew Kittle a little bit on a play that would have picked up chunk yardage, but that's just pretty much been Jimmy Garoppolo in a nutshell. He's inaccurate. You can blame it on the high ankle sprain, but I think it's more mental, and we've never seen him perform this inaccurately, but the decision-making is what's mind-boggling to me. The defense played so well the first 2 drives. 9 plays the Seahawks ran. 9 plays, only picked up 5 yards. 2 punts they forced the Seahawks into. They had tremendous field position and opportunity to jump ahead early. And just like you said, Shu, they're not a play from behind team. Every time they trailed in a game this year, they've lost. They've never come back and won. They had the lead the entire time against the Giants, the Jets, the Rams, the Patriots. And I actually thought it was the right game plan. I thought initially, so what I said is the 49ers just found their identity, run the ball, rely on the short area passing game. That was so clear in the first quarter that it wasn't working, and you needed to attack the Seahawks pedestrian secondary. They've been horrible all year long. So once Mullen started to do that, they started coming back.
Well, that game plan only works when you have Debo, who is electric in that area. And when you don't no longer have Debo Samuel, you have to figure out a new identity. And Kyle Shanahan failed to do so by not attacking the secondary. So I thought he was going to scheme up and open some leaks, and he did not. I do not like the play calling. His play calling was terrible. And it looks like Kyle has an offensive game plan that's around Jimmy, and he's not calling his particular offense, and it's more of a Jimmy-style Kyle Shanahan offense, and it's not going to work in the NFL right now.
Well, and I think, too, a good point from all this is they don't make adjustments, and part of that is a little bit of overconfidence in Kyle's scheme. He thinks it's going to work no matter what. They don't make adjustments at halftime. He didn't make adjustments, early in the game when they got behind. And like you said, Nick, they kind of shut down Seattle for those first 3 drives. I mean, Russell still got his 4 touchdowns, but I thought the defense played pretty well, especially with all the injuries they've had. And I'm tired of hearing about the injuries because both teams had 5 starters that were out. Yeah, the 49ers have had just a litany. It's ridiculous of what they've gone through. But when you play in a Super Bowl, it's a long season. You have a short off season, no OTAs, no mini camps. So you're not in football shape. So that's what a lot of these injuries come. Now, Kittle's injury was a freak injury, but he's only played 5 games this year. And if he's making that $15 million this year, he's made $3 million a game. All right. And he's going to be injury plagued his entire career. I've said this before they signed him. He plays at 120%. He doesn't protect himself. And, he kind of fell on his foot wrong there and it broke a bone in it. And then the high ankle sprain with Jimmy, they shouldn't have had him come back a week or 2 after. He should have stayed out. Every NFL player is going to say, yeah, I can play. That's when the head coach and the medical staff have to decide whether it's worth it. They would have kept him out another week. Maybe he doesn't get injured. We have him for the rest of the year. Now he's out for the season. So with all the injuries, too, you got to start questioning this medical staff. And to me, the head coach has to step in on that also. So a lot of things going on here. Typical of a team that lost in the Super Bowl the following year. It's tough to get back there. So the revenge tour turned in, that was over in week 2. And now they're just going to have a fire sale. We'll talk about it, I'm sure. Quan Alexander traded today. So now they're trying to dump, salary cap money because the cap's going to drop from 202 to about $1.75 next year. So they've got to shred some salary cap space. D Ford, Richard Sherman probably won't play again as a 49er. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here, as they go down the stretch. Are we looking for another quarterback now? Do we bring Matt Ryan in? Do you draft somebody to let him train behind him? Because you don't want somebody to follow Garoppolo. I just don't think he doesn't have pocket presence. He's a 1-2 read guy, and that's it. He's not accurate. I don't know why. Why would you give that guy $25 million a year?
Yeah, I think when they gave him the initial contract, it was after he came in, took a 1-10 football team, ended the season on the 5-game win streak, 6-10. There, he's riding high. There was a lot of outs on his contract or within his contract. But I want to ask you, because of course you played the game of football, how much do you think his struggles that he's shown over the last couple of weeks actually have to do with the ankle, or is it the mental and the inability that he's shown over the course of his entire tenure in San Francisco that he can't go through his progressions? If his first read's not there, his second read, he makes terrible decisions and is almost clueless at what to do with the ball. He forced that ball to George Kittle yesterday on the 49ers' second drive, right after JaMychal Hasty fumbled out of bounds. Well, at first it was recovered by the Seahawks, then it was overturned, 49ers ball. The very next play, he misses a wide open Kendrick Bourne running down the seam for a touchdown, forces the ball to George Kittle, and who intercepts it other than former 49er DJ Reed that they released in August.
That's right.
So just his inability to go, it's a basic fundamental quarterback skill, and he doesn't have it.
Well, I think when he injured his knee, anytime you get injured for the first time, a major injury, in your mind, it's really hard to overcome. You feel, like you could do anything until you get injured. So I think he struggled then. With a high ankle sprain, he can't push off. So that's affecting his throws. They're flying, they're not accurate, and then he doesn't have pocket presence. He can't feel where the rush is coming from to protect himself. If you feel it coming to the right side, you're going to turn your body or protect yourself at the back. And, with that said, I think, and then I don't want to say, I'm not questioning his football intelligence, but he seems to get one read, maybe a second read, and then he doesn't know what to do, and he's athletic enough to run, but he won't. So, so you got a guy that's just, not doing anything. And it just drives me crazy. And it's got to be driving Kyle crazy. And I don't think he's confident enough in him to open up the offense, but he's got to play him because they're paying him. I'd go with Mullen, and we'll see the next 8 games, how Nick does, because I think he's better off the bench because you don't have to think. Plus, that game was over. Seattle knew it. So, they're throwing the ball down the field, but that showed how weak that secondary was. So Kyle was too cocky. He says, I'm going to run the ball and do what I always do instead of making adjustments. So Bill used to do that wall. It's like, if somebody said Richard Sherman's the best cornerback in the league, Bill would throw at him for the first 6 times to prove it. So he had that kind of arrogance also, but it was more about individual players, not a scheme sort of thing. So I think Kyle lacks the ability to make adjustments, and I don't know. I'm just questioning his relationship with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah,
he's got a man crush on a lot of players that he's kept on that roster. Beathard, Troy Taylor, what's his name? Is it Troy?
Trent
Taylor. Who else? There's just several players. Dante Pettis. They put him in the game probably to showcase him for a trade. He fumbles. It hurts his shoulder, so now you can't get rid of the guy except put him on IR. So I don't know. He's got a lot of space taken up. They gave away a lot of cap space with just 2 contracts, and now they're going to pay the Reaper.
Well, let's talk George Kittle. So we had an interview not too long ago going in after he signed his contract extension about concerns regarding his playing style. He plays so violently, like you said, 120%. And this injury didn't really account for any of that. It was just kind of a freak bang-bang play where he came down funny after hauling in a hell of a catch where he high-pointed the football thrown by Mullins. So that's why Kittle's out. They'll likely be without him for the remainder of the regular season. And if this team can miraculously get into the playoffs, which we'll talk about later, because I have some points that I want to run by you guys as to my thought process regarding the remainder of the season. And you got into trading Quan Alexander. So Quan Alexander, the guy who really started the whole revenge tour concept this past offseason, is the first guy to be traded at the trade deadline. He was traded today for Kiko Alonso, former Rookie of the Year, former Oregon Duck, and a 5th-round pick. And this team is clearly trying to shed cap space going into next season, pick up additional draft capital because there's going to be a lot of holes with the salary cap being dropped down, a lot of pending free agents on this team. Is Quan Alexander the last player we'll see traded before tomorrow?
Well, at this point, I would say probably. I mean,
yeah.
What's the deadline tomorrow? 1 o'clock, is it?
Something like that.
1 o'clock.
There might be. I mean, Kiko Alonso was a player until he got injured, and he might be trade bait in another trade they make because they don't really need another linebacker. I mean, Fred Warner and Drake Greenlaw are playing well. I don't think Greenlaw's ever missed a tackle, whereas Quan could run all over the place, but he missed tackles all the time. So great locker room guy, but they got what they needed out of him for these young linebackers. So, and he was 12.5 against the cap for the next 2 years. So there's $25 million they shaved. So I think it was a good move, and we'll see if there's going to be any other action. But they're light at running back. Jeff McKinnon and JaMychal Hasty are both change of pace backs. They're not every down backs. And McKinnon saying he had tired legs. He hadn't played in 3 years. I get tired of these young players. I mean, these players, it's just like, we used to hit in practice, and I'm not being the old bitter guy, but these guys, they don't hit. They don't do anything. And, they're just complaining about tired legs. What is this, load management like in the NBA now?
Yes.
So they're hurting at running back. So I could see him maybe picking up somebody, but I don't know if that's worth a trade. You could get, steal somebody off somebody's practice squad. So, but in terms of a trade tomorrow, maybe, but I'd say at this point, if it hasn't happened, probably not.
What's your take, Marco? They're pulling off any last-minute trades?
I don't think so. I mean, if there is a trade, I would say the only person on the 49ers roster who has any value right now besides Trent Williams is Jaquaski Tart. He's most likely not going to return to the 49ers next year, so they could potentially try to send him off to a safety-needed team. That'd be one I'd actually keep an eye out for because there's a few. The Browns need a safety, and I believe the Baltimore Ravens need a safety. Two teams that are looking at the playoffs right now.
But what do you get in return?
Probably the same that you got for Quan, 5th-round pick. I don't know. And this is going to lead me to my next point. The 2020 season, in my opinion, is not over. I'm not ready to write this season off. Yes, the Super Bowl is far out of the question, but as long as you get into the postseason, anything could happen. We've seen crazier things happen. So let's say the team wins one of their next 2 games. They either have to beat the Packers at home this Thursday or beat the Saints 2 weeks from now in New Orleans. If you're 5-5, you're 5-5 going into the bye week. You're going to get back Deebo Samuel, Raheem Mostert. You have other guys from IR who may come back. Weston Richburg, Ronald Blair, Julian Taylor, D Ford, big wild card, Richard Sherman. Again, that's a possibility. If you're 5-5 and you have the Rams who you match up well against, you have games against the Washington football team, the Dallas Cowboys. Those are 3 winnable games right there. And then you just have to steal 2 between the Bills, the Cardinals, and the Seahawks. And talking about the Seahawks, what if they're in a position at week 17 where they're already clinched the number 1 seed in the NFC and you have to play Geno Smith instead of Russell Wilson? I think Nick Mullins can lead the 49ers to a 9-7 record. And with 7 teams in the playoffs, 7 teams now, not 6, a 3rd wild card spot, I think that's not completely out of the question. And am I crazy for thinking that? Or what's your stance on that? Can the 49ers sneak into the playoffs? And will a team even want to play them in the playoffs if they have Raheem Mostert, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle comes back in 8 weeks? That's right around playoff time.
First of all, I don't think Kittle will be back with that injury. A foot for a receiver is tough. I mean, look at Trent Taylor. He's been out for, 3 years? So, and 9-7 is what I predicted this year for the team. So I think, a lot of people thought it was last year, which I did too. And then they kind of made a run. And so anything's possible in the NFL. That's where any given Sunday came up with, that line. So, no, it could possibly happen. But you're right. They've got to win one of the next 2. I would have rather seen the Packers beat the Vikings, so they come in irritated. They want to win. And the Saints are starting to play well. Early in the year, Drew Brees looked like Peyton Manning at 40 years old. He couldn't throw the ball down the field. But they're starting to come back a little bit. So that's, if they can, like you said, get to 5-5 at the break, at the bye, and then maybe make a run, we'll see. Depends on who they get back, So coming back from injury is tough, too. If Mostert misses 5 or 6 games, he's not going to be the same player he was the last 2 years. So there's a lot depending on that. Yeah, that's the fanboy in you speaking. Trying to stick behind your 49ers, and that's great because that's part of who you are. So, but I think at this point, you're going to keep trying to win every game and try to get to the playoffs. But you also got to start thinking John Lynch and front office Parak. Where can we shave space? Sherman, to me, when Sherman went down, the defense stood up because he's a zone guy only. He can't play man anymore. So Robert Saleh was handcuffed by Richard Sherman. They were playing a zone defense around that one guy, So, and with Mosley and Verrett now, they can play man. They can blitz. They can do so many more things than when Sherman was in there. So if I'm the 49ers, Sherman doesn't come back and play. I'd go with Mosley and start developing these young cornerbacks. So I think Sherman, it's probably the last time we'll see him in a 49er uniform. So it's possible, and I like your enthusiasm and your optimism. Mario's shaking his head no, so I'd be curious to see what he thinks.
Yeah, Nick texted me right before the show and asked me this question. I texted him, I said, no, Nick, I don't think so, only because you have too many injuries down. The offense isn't going to be the same. I mean, I do think Kyle's going to open up his offense a little bit more for Nick Mullins because he trusts Nick Mullins a little bit more. But when you look at the 49ers roster, their offense is losing George Kittle. They don't have Debo for the next 2 weeks. Raheem Mostert's gone. So their running game is no longer there. So they're no longer going to have that running game to rely on Nick Mullins to use the play action. So that goes away. The defense could keep them in games, but I just don't see us making the playoffs. And I think like you said, Sherman's not going to be back for the 49ers. I don't think Sherman wants to come back, one, because if you look at it, it's Achilles was getting ready to rupture, is what they were saying.
Right.
Why come back if you want one last contract for your career? So that's why I don't think we see Sherman, and I don't think we see the playoffs. I think we're drafting around 15, 17 spot, right, just out of the playoffs.
And at this point, too, Trevor Lawrence, of course, a couple of great quarterbacks coming out, but the Niners aren't going to have access to them. But Kyle, here's another thing. Kyle thinks he can turn anybody into a great player with his schemes. And he has in the past. Tevin Coleman, there's another man crush he had. Guy hadn't played 5 games. He comes back and starts him. And Jared McKinnon's going, wait a minute, I've been playing the last 5 games. Why aren't I getting the start? So you're starting to create a little bit of not dissension, and then I think a lot of players, for some reason, they rally around Nick Mullins. I don't see that team rallying around Jimmy Garoppolo. So I'm not sure what's going on there in the locker room, in that situation. But it'll be interesting to see, because now the Niners know they have nothing to lose. They can just go balls out and just have some fun like they did last year and, play without pressure. They had all that pressure on them from being a Super Bowl participant last year, and the expectations. Now they've kind of settled away. Maybe they can go back and just have some fun playing football again. And that's usually when you win games, is when you're having fun. So that remains to be seen. But I think in some ways it's going to be fun to watch here in the second half of the season, because we're not sure what we're going to get. And Jordan Reed should be coming back at tight end this week, or maybe Thursday, if I'm not mistaken.
He should be back Thursday.
Yeah, that would be a great help from Mullins too. And I love Ross Dwelly. I think he's one of the better receivers on the team with his hands. So I think they'll be fine at that position, because people were doubling Kittle anyway. So he wasn't contributing that much, for the money he was making. And that's what happens. They double up on him and have a wide receiver beat. And now if there was one positive that came out of that game, Brandon Ayuk. What he had, 8 catches over 100 yards. He's a down the field receiver. And then Kendrick Bourne had 8 catches himself. He's a solid number 3 guy. With Debo, those 3, that's pretty solid group of receivers. But without him, no Dante Pettis. Trent Taylor hasn't done anything, and so it's going to be tough on him, but it'll be fun to watch, I think, because I think Kyle's finally just going to let it go. He needs to let go, quit being so conservative and, only one way. He's got to learn to make some adjustments. It just drives me crazy. So
I want to touch on the Garoppolo leadership and just him not being able to rally his teammates. I feel like there's a huge discrepancy, and a lot of people don't understand this, that there's a sustained difference, a noticeable difference between being well-liked and being a leader. He's liked by his teammates. He's a likable guy in the locker room, but just because you're Mr. Popular does not mean you're a man among men who knows how to rally the troops. And that's a knock that I've had on Jimmy Garoppolo for quite some time. He goes into his shell when things aren't going his way, but when he's playing at a high level because his supporting cast is stepping up, his defense is stepping up, he's Mr. Feels Great, baby, just like he was last year. But when things aren't going his way, he goes into his shell. And you'd think a guy that sat behind Tom Brady for 3.5 years, Tom Brady, the fierce competitor that he is, where he's demanding excellence from his teammates on the sideline, you'd think that Garoppolo would pick up on some of that. But he's a little too cool, calm, and collected for my liking. And I just don't think he's the quarterback this team should move forward with. If there's a clear and obvious replacement better than him that becomes available this offseason, I think you need to pull the trigger. Like if this year was last year and Tom Brady was available, the 49ers would have done everything in their power to sign Tom Brady. They just missed out by 1 year, because that would have been a huge game changer, having him in this offense, being able to deliver strikes to the receivers. And you can see now that the 49ers wide receivers are getting frustrated that every single time they're wide open, Garoppolo's missing them downfield.
It's unbelievable. First of all, leadership, it can be a learned behavior, but I think you either have it or you don't. And
exactly.
Then, for instance, where'd he go? Eastern Illinois or something? and was probably a pretty good leader there. But then he sits behind Tom Brady for 3 or 4 or 5 years. You kind of lose that, and then you go to another team and they don't know you that well. So it's hard to kind of, Brady's the kind of guy, and he sat behind Bledsoe and probably went through the same thing. But once he took over, that's when you have to take over. And I don't think Jimmy's done that either. So I think that's very observant on your part. I've seen him throw interceptions and come off the field smiling. I mean, I wanted to slap the TV and slap him. If I'm playing with him, I'm saying, dude, so I don't know. There's just a lot of uncertainty with the guy, unknown with the guy. He's a total package, like you said, good looking, he's athletic, but that doesn't transfer into, like you said, a leader and, a good quarterback. There's a lot more involved than just that. And I'm starting to think that we have kind of I don't know what the term would be, but he's just, I don't think he's the guy. I really don't. And he had a year and a half of good play, and they gave him $25 million. Why don't you let him play out his contract? Let Kittle play out his contract. They're restricted free agents. You can match whatever happens. So I just think they jumped the gun on paying both of them, and now they're going to pay. And this might bleed into, we finally got this team back on track, and now we might have cap problems because of these two for the next 3 or 4 years.
I agree with your assessment on Jimmy Garoppolo that he's not it. But when you're in the NFL locker room, I know you've been there, and there's a you don't have this problem, but when there's a quarterback who's missing clear reads and you're a defense, you're like, all right, well, he ain't backing us up. We're giving him the ball back and back, and he's turning it over. What are we supposed to do? Win the game ourselves. And you're on the offensive side of the ball, and you're like, well, my quarterback can't do it. So you start to turn away from him, and that's why they start to rally around Nick Mullins. He doesn't care. He gets off the field. He's pissed off when he throws an interception, not smiling when he throws an interception to his former team, New England Patriots, to a former buddy, DJ Reed. He smiled at him, said, good job. Like, the things that Jimmy Garoppolo does irritate me because as a quarterback, you have to hold yourself to the highest standard, and I don't think he does that.
Right. And it's been tough for any 49er quarterback, with Joe, Steve, then Jeff Garcia, and since then there's been 25 quarterbacks there. So there's a certain standard expected here with the 49ers, and that makes it tougher to play that position too. But I don't know. There's just something missing with the guy, and I haven't been around him enough because once he kind of came on, I retired, and so I really can't call it out, but I'm just telling you what I've seen from being in NFL locker rooms as a player and a broadcaster, to where, guys love him, love to hang out with him, but that doesn't make you a great quarterback, And if I'm a wide receiver, I'm running down the field wide open, and he doesn't see me, that's a problem, So because all wide receivers are tough. They're like Denny's. We're open 24 hours a day. He's got to find us and get the ball to us.
Yeah.
And he's one of the most inaccurate passers. That's what was great about Joe. Joe was so accurate. If I was running an in route and the DB was on this side of me, he'd throw it to the other side to lead me away from the DB. That's how accurate he was. And that's what he saw. I don't see that in Jimmy. Jimmy to me, it's like he's just throwing the ball up there. Hopefully the receiver will catch it. So there's just a lot of flaws there. That's all I'll say.
And I think I'm not one of them, but there's a lot of analytic guys that will be like, well, Jimmy Garoppolo was top 5 in completion percentage last year, this and that. But so many of those statistics are because of Kyle Shanahan catering to Garoppolo's weaknesses and getting the ball out of his hands quickly. I mean, we've seen the numbers when he throws the ball at or around the line of scrimmage in comparison to when it's 10 yards or more downfield. So Garoppolo's numbers are heavily inflated because Kyle Shanahan calls plays for him that mask all of his weaknesses. I think I see this going two ways. If Nick Mullins is leading the team, if Garoppolo can come back this year, let's just say he can come back at a point. If Nick Mullins has the 49ers in a position to somehow make the playoffs, you're not going to go back to Jimmy Garoppolo. And then let's say he might, right? It's unpredictable to see what happens with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. The one thing I see with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan is they have a lot of pride in what they do, and they do not want to own their mistakes. And what I mean by that is they paid Jimmy Ward $30 million, $28 million this offseason. Tarvarius Moore is clearly the better player. In a small sample size, Tarvarius Moore flashes, make plays. Jimmy Ward has like 2, 3 interceptions over the course of his 5-6 year career. They are not playing Tarvarius Moore. They're just letting him rot on the bench, not letting him develop because they chose to pay Jimmy Ward, and that's their safety because they need him to play over Tarvarius Moore when it's just so clear that he's not the better player. And then Eric Armstead had his one big year. Eric Armstead was widely regarded as a bust and an underachiever over the course of his first 4 years. Then he has the luxury of playing with DeForest Buckner, Nick Bosa, D Ford. Oh, here comes a 10-sack year from Eric Armstead. He's on pace for 3 sacks this year. 3 sacks. The guy you just paid $85 million, you gave him an $85 million contract, is on pace for 3 years. He does 3 sacks, excuse me. He does not have the ability to take over games or to win on his own and finish off plays with sacks, and that kind of stuff just drives me crazy. So back to what I was saying, I just don't see how Kyle Shanahan goes back to Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he's seen enough of him, and I truly do think we've seen the last of Jimmy Garoppolo in a 49ers uniform. I think the wide receivers are sick of him. I think Kyle Shanahan, you nailed it, Mike. There's this weird relationship between Jimmy Garoppolo and Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan does not speak in the way or speak about Jimmy Garoppolo in the same way that he does opposing quarterbacks. And it's just surreal to me that there's clearly some animosity between the two of them. And I think this is just an unhealthy situation that the 49ers need to just rip the Band-Aid off and move on.
Marco?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when everyone brings up the statistics, analytic type of people, it's like, well, I know Mike knows this. The eye in the sky don't lie. You're missing clear reads. Like, you could tell me all this other stuff. When I turn on the All-22 and I'm watching, like, all right, you missed KB down for a wide-open touchdown. You missed this dude for a wide-open touchdown. Come on now. The eye in the sky don't lie. You're not seeing the field. You're not as good as they hype you up to be. And I just think we've seen the last of Jimmy Garoppolo, and I think Kyle Shanahan is pissed off. Last week, he threw his hands in the sky when he missed Kyle Juszczyk wide open. Like, are you serious?
Well, a good example, Debo, before he got hurt, 11 catches in 2 games. Only 1 was past the line of scrimmage. And he was averaging 12 yards a catch. So this guy, his average was -4 yards. So he's got to make up 16 yards just to average that 12. And then the point you made with the 4 players, Armstead, Kittle, Garoppolo, and Ward. You basically gave those 4 players your entire salary cap. And, 3 to 4 of them, maybe even all 4 of them, aren't going to be quality players for you for a long period of time. So I think, like you said, Marco, I think Kyle has reached his boiling point with Jimmy. And he knows that they don't owe him any money next year. So in some ways, it might be a relief for Kyle that Jimmy got hurt again, a high ankle sprain. And now we can go with Mullins and now start talking about, okay, what are we going to do next? Are we going to keep Garoppolo? Are we going to move on? Because if they move on, it's going to make that organization look bad. All right? They gave this guy $25 million a year for 5 years. Right? They don't have to pay him after next year, but you just threw away $30 million basically. So that's what happens. And you talked about it, Nick, where Lynch and Shanahan won't admit to their mistakes. They won't own up to it. They'll come up with some other reason. So this is something that, they got him back on track, like I said, and now they might set him back with maybe 4 bad choices in terms of, especially at the quarterback position. So it's going to be interesting. Mullins is going to succeed because he just is a good quarterback, and the players love him. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds for the second half. Right now, they're going to try to win games, get back to the playoffs, and then in the offseason, they'll decide which way they're going to go.
Yep. And it's just going to be interesting to follow. There's a couple things just based on our conversations in the offseason. Kyle Shanahan receiving his extension 1 year too early, although it'd be tough to critique how he's called games this year given all the injuries. Like, it's tough to really gauge him as a head coach. And Robert Saleh, on the other hand, he's done a tremendous job coaching up the defense in the wake of losing Nick Bosa and D Ford, Richard Sherman. So there's just so many questions regarding this team moving forward. Let me ask you both this. Let's say Bill Belichick calls and offers you the Patriots' 2nd-round pick. I don't know if they have a 2nd-round pick. This is hypothetical. Would you accept a 2nd-round draft pick for Jimmy Garoppolo? His contract's off the books. You no longer have to pay him for the Patriots' 2nd-round pick.
Well, I think if somebody offered him, they'd almost have to trade him because if you just cut him, it really makes your organization look bad. All right. Because, hey, wait a minute. I thought this was the quarterback of the future. Now you're cutting him a year later. And I wouldn't have given Kyle that extension. I thought they should have waited on that. The guy's blown 2 Super Bowls. I don't care what anybody says. 2 double-digit leads in the fourth quarter in a Super Bowl, and you lose them both. So there's something there. And Kyle, like I said, sometimes I think he thinks he's the quarterback on the field. He never can make it as a player. So this is as close as he could get to being an actual quarterback. And it's a weird little thing because Bill was like that a little bit too, Bill Walsh. But Kyle's got to somehow, I need to see him let that go and show faith in the guy who's playing that position. So we'll see that in the next 8 games with Nick Mullen or not. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I agree. You'd have to send him off. There's no way you keep him around if a team's offering you. But I do want to give John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan credit because they made a mistake by signing Quan Alexander to that massive contract, and they got rid of it. So it could be a sign moving forward that, hey, they're starting to realize, like, we can't be doing stupid stuff to jeopardize our cap space and jeopardize our future. So hopefully they see that Jimmy's not the guy of the future, and they move on from him.
Well, look at
Did they give Quan that contract?
Yeah,
Yes.
they gave. So this is another problem that they have is Jerick McKinnon was coming off injury, or no, Jerick McKinnon was just the 3rd down back for the Vikings. They thought Jerick McKinnon would blossom from a 3rd down back to this every down workhorse, made him like a top 5 highest paid running back in the league. Then they signed Weston.
That's Kyle's arrogance that he can turn average players into great players.
Yep. And then there was Weston Richburg, who, if I'm not mistaken, was playing guard for the Giants the season before we signed him to play center, made him one of the highest paid centers. And then there was Quan Alexander coming off a major injury where they signed him like a top 3. So just the free agents, it's mind-blowing to me that the 49ers have turned this thing around as quickly as they did because John Lynch has made very questionable free agent signings and very questionable draft picks in the first 3 rounds of each draft, pretty much, except for 2019, where he got Nick Bosa and then Deebo Samuel. Brandon Ayuk looks good, but you go back to 2017, it was just bust after bust after bust. 2018, Mike McGlinchey, he looks really bad right now playing right tackle. Your second pick was Dante Pettis. Fred Warner, he's a stud. Tarvarius Moore, you don't even make an effort to get him on the field. So I'm not really encouraged by the front office's ability to make the correct move this offseason, I guess you can say.
Marco?
I kind of have to agree with what you're saying there, Nick, because when you do look at all the draft picks they've made, you do look at they wanted to go with Kirk Cousins, all that other stuff. It's like, well, like starting to look at it, it's like, well, what are they seeing? X's and O's is different than evaluating people. You could understand X's and O's when it comes to evaluating talent. I do not see John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan doing that well at all.
Well, and it was a joke there for a while. You had to have a torn ACL in college to get drafted by the 49ers. And that seemed to be kind of their MO for a while. So I'll give them credit for turning it around. But they're also, and they have created championship depth because otherwise they wouldn't be able to stay in games this year.
Exactly.
But they're not developing players like Moore, the safety. He should be in there getting developed. Quan Williams, he got hurt. He's coming back. So Mosley, Witherspoon, I think they've given up on. But you also have to develop players. But by giving the money to those 4 players we talked about, they got rid of DeForest Buckner. They got rid of this, so they're kind of caught in between. They had some success early. Now they're kind of getting a taste of the mistakes they made, and now we'll see how they adjust to that.
And that's a good point. The develop is the key word for me because, yes, they've been able to find undrafted free agents and develop them. But when you look at their own draft picks that they selected and that weren't starters or good right away, they've had a very difficult time developing them. Looking at guys like CJ Beathard, 3rd-round pick, never developed into the quarterback. Kyle Shanahan, no draft analyst had CJ Beathard going in the 3rd round. But to your point, Mike, Kyle Shanahan's going to make CJ Beathard the 49ers quarterback of the future. This is my quarterback to groom into the guy I want leading this offense. Joe Williams. Kyle Shanahan forced John Lynch to put Joe Williams back on the draft board after he retired from playing football in Utah. Remember him back in the day?
Yes.
Yeah, he never even played a snap for the 49ers. Then you get in 2018, Dante Pettis. Kyle Shanahan's going to make Dante Pettis so he fits the offense perfectly. He looked good at times at the end of his rookie year, never developed, completely mishandled his career. Ahkello Witherspoon never developed. Tarvarius Moore is going to be in that same boat very soon. So if there's guys that don't step in and aren't good right away, Dre Greenlaw is the one name that comes to mind as to someone that really progressed as the 2019 season went on. But outside of him, if you're not elite right when you step on the field, like Fred Warner being your middle linebacker from day one, Nick Bosa being your star edge rusher right from day one, Deebo Samuel was more of a gadget player. I don't think he really stepped in. I still don't think he's a true number one or number two wide receiver. He's a gadget. You use Samuel in multiple ways. So this organization has really struggled to develop players that don't play the defensive line position at any rate. Justin School may be worthy of that conversation as well. The guy that they drafted, the right tackle, left tackle, he plays a swing tackle position, had a good year filling in for Joe Staley and Mike McGlinchey last year. But the bad draft selections that they made are certainly coming back to haunt them right now, like you touched on.
Well, I think, too, when John never been a GM, Kyle never been a head coach, they were out to prove really quickly that they could do, because people question John Lynch. Wait a minute, this guy's not, he's been a broadcast and a player, but, he hadn't, drafted players, developed players. And so I think Kyle and John were on that same page. We got to turn this thing around as quickly as we can. And they did. But by not developing players, now they're going to have a lag again. And you might have a year or two where they're going to struggle again because of that. So there's a little bit of that in there where they had to prove to themselves, number one, that they could do these two jobs. And number two, to everybody else that was scrutinizing them. And now we're going to see maybe some flaws in their system, little cracks in the dam, we'll say.
Well, to your point about not being able to develop, looking ahead to this offseason, you have Trent Williams, who's going to be a free agent. K'Wan Williams is a free agent. Richard Sherman, Kyle Juszczyk, Kendrick Bourne, Jaquaski Tart. You have a full list of guys that are starting on your team that you may not be able to bring back next year because of the salary cap issue. And that's why it is crucial. It's essential to be able to develop your own players. And I'm not talking about guys that you're investing first-round draft capital in. I'm talking about day two draft picks, guys that aren't being selected in the first round that need to come in, step up, and just really develop year to year. And we haven't seen that from anybody really over the course of the entire tenure of Lynch and Shanahan.
Yeah, I agree. And most people like to give them credit for finding Raheem Mostert, but Raheem Mostert was already on the roster before Kyle and John got there. Mm-hmm. So everyone's like, well, Kyle found Raheem Mostert. No, he didn't. Chip Kelly did. He was on the roster when Chip Kelly was there.
I forgot about that. You're right.
So when people were starting to like, oh, well, Kyle develops running backs. Well, yeah, he develops running backs, but his best running backs is someone else from a previous regime. And then you look at the best player on defense. There really isn't one besides Fred Warner because they don't develop anyone. And you would think John Lynch would know, hey, we need to learn how to develop our guys coming as a player, a defensive player, especially because it's a harder position because it's an offensive league right now.
No question. And Jimmy Ward's a good example. Here's a safety. John was a safety. He knows what it takes. And Jimmy was hurt his entire career. So in the meantime, somebody should have been developed behind him, and it just didn't happen, So I don't know. There's just a lot going on this year, from going to the Super Bowl to all this, chaos and mayhem and dissension. You're starting to feel a little dissension among that team. And that's what I noticed in that Seattle game. I saw receivers walking off the field looking at Garoppolo like, dude, and whereas when Mullins got in there, man, everybody pepped up. So, but like I said, Brandon Ayuk was a positive coming out of that game. Kendrick Bourne's a solid receiver. But like you said, Deebo is kind of a weapon. You can use him in a lot of different, but he's not a number one receiver either. Yep. So they've got a lot of holes to fill and a lot of due diligence, we'll say. But in the meantime, they're just going to try and win football games from here on out. So I think it's going to be fun to watch, though, with Mullen at the quarterback position.
I don't think that Kyle Shanahan's the type of coach to not put forth the same type of preparation moving forward just because the team isn't experiencing the same type of success. So let me just ask this question. Should the 49ers throw in the towel, start looking ahead of the 2021 offseason, play for draft selections, or do you keep trying to win football games to get into the playoffs?
No, a professional athlete doesn't tank. When you go out on the field, you try to win every game. And even with no fans out there or anything, once you get out there, because in football, if you relax, you're going to get hurt. You got to go 100% anytime you're on a football field, or you're going to get hurt, especially in today's, size, speed ratio. So, no, they'll continue to, Lynch might be doing that, start preparing for the offseason and looking at players and looking at free agents. But Kyle's going to continue to try to win games, as are the players. And because in their mind, they're not out of it. It's like you said, if they come out 5-5 at the bye, there's still a shot because there's an extra team this year. So everybody was talking about the entire NFC West is going to get in the playoffs. Well, right now, if there's one team that's not, it's probably the 49ers. But a lot of football to be played, and we'll see what happens, So I'm pulling for them. I always do. But at the same time, I'm an analyst. So people used to say to me, how come you're so hard on the 49ers? You used to play for them. I said, yeah, I used to, but now I'm an analyst. So, I'm not going to, suck up to them, so to speak. And I like the fact that neither one of you do either. So
they're not in an ideal position, obviously, considering all the injuries. It's not completely out of I was just looking at the standings in the NFC as a whole. They're about like the 9th seed right now because they have the 8th best record, but the Eagles in the weak NFC East are 3-5 or whatever they are. And they are in the playoffs automatically because they're on pace to win their division.
Well,
so it's really going to come down to the Bears. And then if you can steal a game against the Rams and go 2-0 against the Rams, that's going to be the one where if you're 5-5 going into the bye, you beat the Rams after the bye week when you return, you swept them. So you're going to have any tiebreaker against them. So that's why I'm not trying to seem overly optimistic, but I'm putting a lot of thought into this where if
I see that.
If the 49ers are 4-6, though, don't get me wrong. If they're 4-6 going into the bye, season's over. You can't recover from that. But if you're 6-5 after the Rams game, there's a legit shot there.
All right. If there's any situation where they're throwing in the towel, they'll start developing players. So if you're 5-5, 4-6 at the break, now you start playing guys that you want to look at. And, maybe Jimmy Ward's not worth keeping around. Maybe so-and-so, maybe this. So, and, that defensive line's got a bunch of no-name guys that, are playing very well, when Bosa and D Ford went down. So I think that's what you look for. If they're 5-5 at the bye, they'll continue to play. If not, you'll start developing players. And this is a good chance for them to do that because they haven't done it in the past.
Yeah, I agree. You can't throw in the towel.
No.
If you do, NFL players are going to look at you like, what the hell are you doing? I don't want to play for this team.
Right.
Your house on the line every play. So you can't tank. You can't try to get into a better position to get a player you want in the draft. I think the 49ers are going to come out. I think Kyle Shanahan's going to have that little ego he has and have a mentality for Nick Mullins so they could try to get into the playoffs. And I think, Nick, you have a good point, man. You do have a good point. You put everything in perspective. If they get into the playoffs, I'm tipping my hat off to Kyle Shanahan and Robert Saleh because that means they have their offense clicking and that defense is still a top 5 defense.
Well, if you had to compare them, Saleh's done a better job than Shanahan with the injuries.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
On the defensive side of the ball, he's done a better job than, and I think by Richard getting hurt, it freed Saleh up to do a lot more with his defense.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a chance for young players, though, if they get an opportunity to show that, hey, I'm the next guy up here. And because I always hated that word backup. I was a starter in the league for years. I was a backup. Everybody in the NFL can play. All right. So, you're just a matter of waiting your turn or whatever. So I think a better term would be I'm available. Not about I'm available if you need me.
It's all about opportunity.
That's it. So and you're going to have a lot of young players maybe get those opportunities here in the second half of the season.
So we're speaking highly of Robert Saleh. This will be our final question before we wrap things up. Will he be the 49ers defensive coordinator in 2021, or is he as crystal clear of a head coaching candidate as it gets?
I thought he should have taken the head coaching job he was offered last year. Those don't come along at all. Not I was going to say very often, but at all. When you get an offer for a head coach, you need to take it. Because somebody will see him turn that down and he said, oh, I have unfinished business here. Yeah, okay, but dude, this is a head coaching job. Yeah, he might be making $1 million a year as a coordinator, but you can make 5 to 10 as a head coach. and set yourself up, get one contract, you're set for life. That's not why they do it. But I think he made a big mistake by not taking a head coaching job last year. So this year, say they go, 6-10, 9-7, all of a sudden, Robert Saleh's not that hot as a marketable head coach again. So he might not ever get another shot again. And I hope that I'd like to think he will. But when you get offered a head coach, you got to take it.
Yeah, I agree. But my thing is he lost two of his best players on defense, D Ford and Nick Bosa.
I understand that.
And he's kept a top 5 defense.
Right.
So when you look at it, it's like, okay, well, he's kept a top 5 defense. He's knows what he's doing, X and O's, and he's a leader of men. I mean, he likes to rally his team around him.
Right.
So there could be a team that jumps for a defensive coach, but I think it's an offensive head coach league now. Everyone wants the next Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan. So I don't think he's going to get a chance anymore.
Well, it's like Vic Fangio, 49ers former defensive coordinator. Couldn't ever get a head coaching job. Finally got one. Defensive coaches, I used to say that defensive coaches and offensive line coaches don't make good head coaches. I don't know why, but like you said, Marco, it's an offensive-minded league. So you got to score points here, and so it'll be interesting to see the entire second half. So gives us a reason to watch, because we all kind of know what we have in Garoppolo. Now we'll see what in an extended period of time what we'll have with Nick Mullins.
Mike, thank you again for joining us. We appreciate it so much. We'd love to have you on again another time. This concludes the now 16th episode of the Faithful Fanatic